Today feels like one of those days where you can almost feel something shifting around this Broncos team. And honestly, if you've been following everything that's happened over the last few weeks, you probably have that same feeling too. Because we've got not one, but two major Broncos stories to talk about today. The first one involves a player from another NFL team who's suddenly being mentioned as a potential answer to one of Denver's biggest weaknesses. It's the kind of possibility that wasn't getting much attention before. But after what we've seen recently, it's becoming harder and harder to ignore. Then we'll move to another story that could have a much bigger impact on the Broncos' future than a lot of fans realize. A key starter is now being mentioned in a surprising trade scenario, and if it actually happened, it could completely change how this roster looks heading into the new season. So today, we're breaking down both stories, what they really mean, and whether Broncos Country should actually be taking these rumors seriously. Before we jump in, if you're a real Broncos fan, I'd really appreciate you hitting that like button and subscribing to the channel. I'm Andrew, and this channel is still brand new. Our first goal is to reach 500 subscribers, and I'd love for the people who have been believing in this community since the very beginning to be part of that journey. So if you truly bleed orange and blue, join us, and let's get into today's news. The first story starts with something that's becoming more and more obvious after the Broncos wrapped up their first week of organized team activities. Even after all the work they've done this offseason, one major question still hasn't been answered, and that's the tight end room. Yes, Denver added 2 rookies through the draft with Justin Joly and Dallin Bentley. And there's also plenty of excitement about Caleb Lohner because of his incredible athletic traits. But if we're being honest, asking any of those young guys to immediately become difference makers for a team that's trying to compete for a championship is a massive gamble. That's really the heart of this conversation. The Broncos brought back every tight end who was on the roster last season: Evan Engram, Adam Troutman, Lucas Kroll, and Nate Adkins. On paper, that's depth. But when you look closer, every single player has limitations. Engram is one of the better receiving tight ends in football, but blocking has never been his biggest strength. Kroll is another pass-catching option. Joly, Bentley, and Lohner also project more as receiving threats than physical blockers. That basically leaves Troutman and Adkins as the only true blocking tight ends on the roster, and that's a problem. For the last 3 seasons, Denver has consistently had one of the weakest tight end groups in the entire NFL. If this offense wants to become more balanced, especially in the running game, they need someone who can make an impact at the line of scrimmage as well as catch passes. The issue is that free agency doesn't really offer many answers anymore. Most of the available veterans don't fit what the Broncos actually need. That's why the conversation has started shifting toward the trade market. Now, there aren't any fresh reports saying a trade is close. This is more about looking at players who could realistically become available if another team decides to make a move. And one name stands above the rest: Cole Kmet of the Chicago Bears. Kmet has become one of the most interesting names because of what's happening in Chicago. New head coach Ben Johnson loves using 2 tight end formations. But the Bears also spent a 3rd-round pick on rookie Sam Roush, creating a situation where Kmet could eventually become expendable if they decide to move in a different direction. For Broncos fans, that's a fascinating possibility because Kmet brings a much more complete skill set. He's capable as a receiver, but he's also a much stronger blocker than several of Denver's current options, making him the kind of balanced tight end this offense has been missing. But Kmet wasn't the only name mentioned. Another possibility is Luke Musgrove from the Green Bay Packers. There were reports before last year's trade deadline that Denver had some level of interest in him before Tucker Kraft went down for the season. While those rumors are old, Musgrove could still be someone worth monitoring if Green Bay's depth chart changes again. Then there's Jeremy Ruckert from the New York Jets. The Jets recently drafted Kenyon Sadiq after already selecting Mason Taylor early the previous year. With that kind of investment at tight end, Ruckert could become available. There's also a connection worth mentioning. As Jets general manager Darren Mauge previously worked alongside Broncos general manager George Paton in Denver, making communication between the two organizations much easier if conversations ever happened. Another interesting name is Michael Mayer of the Las Vegas Raiders. Trading inside the AFC West is never easy, but Mayer has previously been linked to frustration over his role under former head coach Pete Carroll. Now that Clint Kubiak is leading the Raiders, his role could increase, which may make a trade much less likely. Still, his talent alone makes him someone Denver would probably check on. Finally, there's TJ Hawkinson of the Minnesota Vikings. Earlier this offseason, his name surfaced in trade rumors because of his expensive contract. Injuries have slowed him down over the last couple of years, and while he was once viewed as one of the NFL's best young tight ends, his production hasn't quite returned to that level. Financially, though, pulling off that trade would be much more difficult for Denver. When you put everything together, the reality is pretty simple. If the Broncos truly want to improve this tight end room before the season begins, a trade may be their only realistic path. The front office chose not to make a splash during free agency, instead bringing back Adam Troutman, Lucas Krull, and Nate Adkins, while allowing the market to dry up around them. If none of these trade possibilities become real, Denver may have no choice but to wait for final roster cuts around the league and hope another team releases someone who can finally solve one of the biggest remaining weaknesses on this roster. Now, let's get into the second story, because this one is a lot more controversial. The Broncos are coming off an incredible 2025 season. Not many people expected this team to make that kind of leap, but they shocked the league by reaching the AFC Championship game before eventually falling to the New England Patriots. Even with that loss, it felt like Denver had officially announced that it was back among the NFL's contenders. This offseason, the front office didn't completely reshape the roster. Instead, they showed confidence in the group they already have. The biggest move was trading for star wide receiver Jalen Waddle. That move immediately gave Bo Nix another explosive weapon and added even more speed and playmaking ability to an offense that continues to grow. Defensively, though, the Broncos looked almost identical to the unit that was one of the league's best last season. That's why this latest trade proposal caught so many people off guard. Mo Moton of Bleacher Report recently suggested one trade for every NFL team. His proposal for Denver was surprising. He believes the Broncos should trade starting cornerback Riley Moss before the start of the 2026 season in exchange for a mid-round draft pick in the 2027 NFL Draft. At first glance, that sounds crazy. Why would you move one of your starting corners after the kind of season he just had? Riley Moss started all 17 games in 2025 and tied Carolina Panthers cornerback Michael Jackson for the NFL lead with 19 pass breakups. He became a huge part of one of football's most dominant defenses and proved he could handle a full-time starting role. So why would anyone even consider trading him? According to Moton, it comes down to timing, money, and roster planning. The Broncos invested a first-round pick in cornerback Jahdae Barron during the 2025 NFL Draft. When you spend that kind of draft capital on a player, the expectation is that he'll eventually become a starter. At the same time, Riley Moss is entering the final year of his contract and is scheduled to become an unrestricted free agent. After the 2026 season, that creates a difficult decision for Denver. If the Broncos already believe Jahdae Barron is their future at the position, and they don't plan to give Riley Moss a long-term contract extension, then this offseason could represent the highest trade value Moss will ever have. Instead of potentially losing him for nothing in free agency, Denver could acquire future draft capital while clearing a starting role for Barron from a business standpoint. You can understand the argument, but from a football standpoint, that's where Broncos country is probably split right down the middle. Riley Moss has earned the trust of this defense. He's proven he can play at a high level against top receivers, and chemistry matters in a secondary that's already one of the strengths of this football team. Trading away a player coming off a career season, especially when your goal is winning a Super Bowl right now, is an incredibly risky move. Yes, Jahdae Barron has tremendous upside. The Broncos clearly believe he can become a star, but there's still a difference between projecting greatness and relying on it before a player has fully proven himself in meaningful NFL games. Personally, unless the Broncos receive an offer that's simply too good to refuse, I'd have a hard time moving Riley Moss before this season starts. Championship windows don't stay open forever, and weakening one of your biggest strengths just to prepare for next year can sometimes end up costing you the opportunity that's sitting right in front of you. At the same time, this is exactly why these conversations are happening. Successful franchises don't just think about today. They're constantly balancing the present with the future. Whether it's trying to solve the tight end position through a trade for someone like Cole Kmet, Luke Musgrove, Jeremy Ruckert, Michael Mayer, or TJ Hawkinson, or deciding what to do with Riley Moss as Jahdae Barron continues to develop. Every decision the Broncos make over the next few weeks could shape how far this team goes in 2026. And that's what makes this such an exciting time to be a Broncos fan. Expectations are finally back. This team isn't trying to rebuild anymore. They're trying to win. If you enjoyed today's update, make sure to leave a like and let me know your thoughts in the comments. Would you trade for Cole Kmet or another tight end? And would you actually consider moving Riley Moss, or is that a mistake the Broncos can't afford to make? I'm really curious to hear where Broncos Country stands. And if you're enjoying the channel, don't forget to subscribe. Broncos News Daily is still brand new, and our first goal is to reach 500 subscribers. If you believe this team has what it takes to compete for a Super Bowl, and you want to be part of this community from the very beginning, we'd love to have you with us. Thanks for watching, and as always, go Broncos!